So Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, spent their first full day together on the campaign trail with 2 stops in the Midwest. The pair visited Eau Claire, Wisconsin yesterday, looking to build more momentum for the new Democratic ticket. There was plenty of enthusiasm for Harris and Walz. Look at this line. This says everything you need to know. Standing in the sun, waiting for a chance to get to a Kamala Harris-Tim Walz rally. 12,000 people packed the outdoor rally despite warm temperatures, which Governor Walz acknowledged when he spoke to the crowd. Meanwhile, the vice president again drew a clear contrast between their campaign and the Republican ticket.
And a real special thank you to everybody here. Looking out across here, look, you're busy people. You got things to do. It's a summer day. You had to walk 2 miles. I had nothing to do with that, by the way, nothing. But you came here for one beautiful, simple reason. You love this country and this democracy.
And understand, in this fight, as Tim Walz likes to point out, we are joyful warriors. Joyful warriors. Because we know that while fighting for a brighter future may be hard work is good work. Hard work is good work. And so we will continue to fight for affordable housing, for affordable health care, affordable child care, and paid leave. We believe in a future where we lower the cost of living for America's families so that they have a chance not just to get by, but to get ahead.
So then it was on to Michigan. After that event in Wisconsin, Vice President Harris and Governor Walz spoke to a fired-up crowd in Detroit, Michigan last night. The campaign says it was forced to change venues to an airport hangar after receiving 47,000 ticket requests to the event. According to the campaign, 15,000 attended, making it one of their largest rallies yet.
Unlike Donald Trump, I will always put the middle class and working families first. Because Coach Walz and I know the middle class built this great country of ours, and when the middle class is strong, America is strong. The man has openly vowed, if reelected, that he will be a dictator on day one. Think about what that means when he said that he will even, quote, terminate the Constitution of the United States. Because let us be very clear, someone who suggests we should terminate the Constitution of the United States should never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. Never again.
I don't know if we can find some video of the crowds there, but Charlie Sykes, I'd like to go to you because yesterday on this show you said, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in Michigan and Wisconsin. So what do you think about what is happening in Michigan and Wisconsin, especially at rallies like this where you have people showing up in the heat, showing up because they just met Tim Walz and they want to get more, and they are just meeting Kamala Harris as a candidate, but they're showing up for her in droves. And I'll just say, personal anecdote, I know some Republican women who worked in government for Republican candidates and politicians who are showing up at one of these rallies. We're going to travel across the country to be there for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. What do you make of it? Is it a sugar high or is something happening here?
Well, it may be a sugar high, but something's definitely happening here. You always try to sift out the wishful thinking and the speculation from what's actually happening, and that's actually happening. Look, Eau Claire, Wisconsin is I would say, 52, 53%, Biden area surrounded by surrounded by a sea of red. That's a big crowd to turn out in Wisconsin. But you're seeing this around the country, and I think it's an indication of the fact that here's a party that hasn't had these kinds of big rallies, or hasn't had this kind of enthusiasm, and it is really it is generating a lot of activism that you don't see. I was talking to some Democrats yesterday here in Wisconsin, and they're seeing this up and down the ballot. I mean, it's not just the presidential race. These people are being activated. And again, just remember where we were 3 weeks ago. The mood of the Democratic Party compared to this is really extraordinary. But that turnout in Wisconsin is important because, of course, this is the theory of the case, right, for Tim Walz, that he will have this kind of appeal, not just in Minnesota, but in rural areas like Eau Claire, Wisconsin, in Michigan, and at least that's playing out in the short term. And the contrast, if I could, the contrast between what you're seeing there on the screen and the fact that where is Donald Trump? Donald Trump is not on the campaign trail. And you have J.D. Vance doing this sort of pathetic, weird stalking thing. So this is rather extraordinary split screen, the non-Trump campaign versus these kinds of enthusiastic rallies.
Right. We're going to get to the awkward stalking the plane moment in just a minute. But I'm just curious, Jonathan Lemire, because, of course, Joe doesn't like it when I do this, but I do watch a lot of the right, whether it's Fox News or Newsmax or podcasts, and I want to hear what the reaction is on the right. And what I found interesting is that it's extremely mixed and extremely vitriolic and extremely loud, but not all the same stories. Almost as if there's a grasping going on. I could be overstating it, but it's everything from talking about his walk, talking about his appearance, trying to spread disinformation about his story, but very loud, very there's almost like a manic reaction to scramble to figure out what's wrong with this guy. And then you cut to a picture of Tim Walz, and he's on the shotgun with his daughter at the Minnesota State Fair, or, surrounded by kids. I mean, he doesn't have, I don't know. I mean, does this look like a cruel, mean guy? Does this look like the boogeyman? Because last time I checked, he's a pretty popular guy who is now garnering crowds of 10, 12, 14,000 along with Kamala Harris. So which is it, Jonathan Lemire?
Yeah, I mean, certainly right now, Republicans are straining for any sort of coherent attack lines on the new Democratic ticket, on Vice President Harris, on Governor Walz. I mean, they're debuting a few more, which we'll see if they have traction or not, including calling into question some of parts of Governor Walz's military service. But right now, this is a remarkable rollout for the Democrats, in sharp contrast to the very shaky rollout that J.D. Vance has had so far since he was added to the ticket. And we should note the Cook Political Report, which has a pretty good read on polling and handle of things, just moved 3 states, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. All 3 had been leaning Republican, now in the toss-up category, which shows Harris has moved anywhere between 2 and 5 points in those states, showing just how tight this race has become.
Wow.
And Eugene Daniels, we saw there in Wisconsin the appeal of this ticket, sort of out in more suburban, rural areas. That's where Tim Walz certainly is going to spend a lot of time. But the vice president and her running mate were also in Detroit last night. You were in Detroit. You were at the rally. And she drew a big crowd there as well. And that's also so key here. There were so many Democrats in months, the last few months, when President Biden was atop the ticket, who were worried that he couldn't turn out cities, he couldn't turn out young voters, he couldn't turn out voters of color. You need to run up margins in the big cities in order to win those battleground states. At least for one night, Harris proved quite the draw. Give us your read as to give your takeaways from what you saw.
Yeah. 15,000 people in kind of an airport hangar is not how I typically think of Vice President Harris. And I've been covering her for this entire time. And during 2019, is people looking for, and I talked to folks yesterday who were hot and people were kind of falling out, needing water, who stayed there for hours waiting to kind of just get a glimpse. It's something that we've never seen because they see her as a solution to a problem they had. For a long time, Democrats felt like they had no chance in a lot of these states, including Michigan, that they were losing their grip on the possibility of winning later in November, that they were losing the ability to beat Donald Trump. And so what you're hearing and seeing from folks is this excitement that, like, we're back on the board, right? That is how Democrats are feeling right now. And they see Vice President Harris and now Tim Walz as a new beginning to something. And they have not a lot of time. I will say Vice President Harris herself has been very clear with her team. Talked to a bunch of staff. We're in the hotel, as you can see here in Detroit. And the thing that they keep saying is that she has brought up over and over and over again to remind her team to not get obsessed with the sugar high. We reported this in Politico a couple weeks back. And she's continued to say that. She said in all of these, in this stump speech, that, you know, we're the underdog, because she is very cognizant of 2016 when Democrats felt like they had it in the bag and then folks didn't turn out to vote. So she is telling everybody, including the folks at the rallies, the folks behind closed doors, that don't get used to this sugar high. You have to get out and do the work. We are the underdogs, because she can see how excited a candidate could get with all of these rallies. And then at the end of the day, maybe it doesn't turn itself into an actual win in November. It is, you know, like I said, I've been covering her this entire time. And the idea that Vice President Harris would have 15,000 people in an airport hangar in Michigan is just like, it is kind of head spinning for those of us who've been paying a lot of attention. And also same thing for President Biden, right? President Biden's biggest the biggest events were 2,000, 3,000 people. Those pale in serious comparison, including the folks in Wisconsin who walked for miles, literally 2 miles, including our colleague Elena Schneider, who was there covering it, had to get out of her car and walk 2 miles so she could actually get to the event. And people have been doing that here, there, and we're going to Arizona later today for her event tomorrow. And it seems like the campaign says there's a lot, there's thousands and thousands of people ready to do the same thing. So this is the swing and this rollout of Tim Walz and this ticket, it has gone really well for Vice President Harris and her team right now.
I completely agree. Kamala Harris, of all people, would know you never, especially as a woman, we know never to get confident and to keep the work going. But if you look at that crowd, if I could just point out some contrasts here. Donald Trump says people in the crowd should get punched. Reporters should get punched. You know, screams things about people who need to get dragged out. We will have Kamala Harris's response to protesters in just a moment. And by the way, Jackie Alamany, let's see. People like getting so overheated at rallies or in audiences and needing water. You know where that happens? At Adele concerts, at Taylor Swift concerts. That's like, you get them on Instagram. You see those moments where Adele is like, stop, please, let's get this person some water. And Tim Walz literally did that yesterday because somebody needed water, and it was trending as this incredible moment. I don't know what's going on, but people are very excited about this ticket, and this ticket knows it needs to keep working. The Harris campaign is booked and busy, visiting swing states this weekend. And there's another contrast. Former President Trump's schedule seems kind of empty. He spent the past couple of days in dark Mar-a-Lago, posting pictures with a podcaster. Today, the vice president will hold another campaign event in Michigan before traveling to Phoenix for a rally there tomorrow. Harris then heads to Las Vegas for a campaign event on Saturday.
ABC has announced a Harris-Trump debate for next month. Trump basically reversing course, at least in his words, now saying he will debate Harris, apparently worried the race is now trending away from him. And there's more to the story, and we have that news coming up in this hour. While we begin with Kamala Harris taking her running mate tour through Michigan to address auto workers today.
There's a suggestion that somehow strength is about making people feel small, making people feel alone. But isn't that the very opposite of what we know unions know to be strength?
This is a bit of preaching to the choir, but the choir needs to sing right now. The choir needs to sing. We know that unions built the middle class. The rest of America has to. You know who doesn't believe that? Donald Trump.
You hear both the candidates there on the Democratic side. In this event, built on the rallies they've been holding this week, showing enthusiasm, Trump was actually asked about those large Harris rallies when he spoke to reporters this afternoon. The Harris campaign says they are thrilled with what they call this blue-collar, Midwest, down-home credibility that Governor Walz brings to the ticket. Another shot of energy for Democrats in what is usually, let's remember, a sleepier political season where you have the ice cream trucks out in the August heat and people hang outside, kids run around the neighborhood. Where I've been, most everyone tries to grab an ice cream from the freezer or the truck if they can, a popsicle from one of those trucks that drives through the area, playing the tune we all know, and people have their different favorites. One classic is the patriotic firecracker popsicle you see here. I bet you've seen it before. Those iconic stripes of red, white, and blue. Honestly, it's the kind of treat that any bipartisan leader can appreciate. The spirit that red and blue not only can coexist, but even thrive together. And if the colors drip and combine a little bit, so be it. Now, if these scenes evoke kind of classic suburban Americana, where families and local schools and football games all combine, the kind of stuff Tim Walz has been talking up, well, that's no accident. Because the Harris campaign and many Democrats see Walz as living that life, from teacher to coach to veteran. I bet you've heard about it by now. That he embodies it all, that in his political appeal and symbols, Walz, with all of his fun family business, is a firecracker popsicle. Think about it. Here's a red and blue popsicle. You see the red first. If you open the wrapper a bit, you might only see that red initially. You certainly taste the red first. And it's a lot of red up top. But over time, you get to the blue. And that's almost kind of the heart or center of it. You start red but end blue. And most people find, if I may make an observation about popsicle life, they like that blue. Dem strategists see Walz as that political popsicle, the visible red at the top, but so much blue inside, with his many heartland symbols associated with something that this red and MAGA Republican cohort have tried to seize. From the literal color red, right? Red is just a color, but in politics we know what it means, to the flag pins, to the camo, to the entire collection of cultural signifiers which they claim are somehow only specific to red states, even if we know better, from family values and the role of a strong providing father to football and its inspiration, its grit, its vibe. There's Coach Walz. To those schools themselves, which MAGA has tried to own and seize, and policy, from what books are allowed to how teachers can include or exclude students in conversations. That's something Walz knows about from actually doing it. To the other symbol that's gotten so much attention lately, the hunting and gun culture. Is that only red, like the political map or the popsicle? Tim Walz is part of gun culture, from the National Guard to Minnesota hunting life. But like a lot of gun owners who could wrongly be seen as somehow purely right-wing red, the top of that popsicle gives way to a more moderate center-left blue. Policies that, in his case, balance gun use and liking guns, which is how he'd put it, with safety. Now, is that all blue? Maybe not. No. He also does not want to confiscate people's guns, but it's certainly more of a flavor mix of red and blue than what you might get at first glance. How serious is this analogy I'm sharing with you tonight? Very. This is the cold truth, if you will. Walz presents and represents some of these symbols, which you probably know about this, and I'm reminding you of it. The right wing has tried to annex as if it was just their own. You're the only one interested in self-defense or hunting or football. Almost sounds unserious, but it is what they've tried to do, despite the actual more diverse, rich nuances of American life and culture in states red, blue, and otherwise. Now, whether it helps or hurts the campaign, who knows, but I can show you that the blue part of the popsicle is backed by facts. Walz has one of the most progressive records of any governor, as the New York Times reports, other outlets noting his progressive cred and record. So that's the cold truth of the popsicle, the red and the blue, and that the red cover, the red top doesn't always predominate. But you might say, okay, all right, I get it, Ari, and okay, but aren't the Democrats liberal? And so they picked a blue guy. What's the difference here? Why is this even news? Well, actually, this is different. If you remember primaries, the parties compete. And that's why we hear about them going right in the Republican primary and left in the Democratic primary. And when Democrats finish the primaries in most normal cycles, they usually, in the general election, often tack to the center. It's so cliched as to almost be unnecessary to say out loud. Biden and Obama certainly did that. And typically, the vice presidential pick comes in this late summer period going into the final 8 weeks, the general election in the fall, when you're tacking center and you're trying to appeal to the so-called swing voters and the independents. Just consider recent Democratic running mates. They were from red states, 2 southern states, I should say 3 southern states, and one of them was sort of purple. And if you might have forgotten, Hillary Clinton's pick, Tim Kaine there on the left. This is a reminder of the look. Now, you might say in certain ways, Walz echoes this. But as I just showed you on blue policy, he goes more left. So you had there the Southern Al Gore from Tennessee. You have Edwards, you might remember. And when Clinton picked Gore in '92, the Times said Gore had tried to position himself in the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. Back in '04, Edwards was touted for the message of economic populism. But why? Because they saw it with this Southern senator as a pitch to independents and moderate Republicans. And Kaine from the Clinton era in '16 was supposed to woo independents and moderate Republicans. Or even Joe Biden, who of course you think of as the president right now, but when Obama picked him back in '08, it was because they wanted a, quote, reliable moderate on crime issues, a seasoned congressional veteran, well-versed in foreign policy, etc. Tim Walz is different. And that may be, interestingly, why Trump has been struggling. Walz and Harris together are hitting a nerve this week. Trump is on defense. He held an unusual press conference. He hasn't done one of those in a long time. He did that today. Walz is putting a spotlight on how MAGA and Trump are out of step in so many ways. And that if you have this stylistic heartland appeal, which I already walked through, and you combine that with the type of blue policies that actually resonate on education, on economic populism, giving kids lunch at school, well, that seems to be working. And they think they can win with that rather than going all the way over to some southern red, moderate, quote unquote, Democrat. The times are changing. And contrast that to what Trump is doing. If I just told you and showed you how instead of going to a red state and the center, they're going blue with just a red topping of culture, contrast that to Project 2025, which we've shown you is staffed by many conservatives in the Trump orbit, with Donald Trump used to praise at the Heritage Foundation and all that. News now, this photo that links Donald Trump directly to the Heritage president, which is the guy running the organization that pushes Project 2025. Quote, they're going to lay the groundwork and detailed plans for what our movement will do, is what Trump said. So it's notable that right now, amidst all this, Trump and some of his longest-serving, most loyal, most conservative and controversial Trump aides are trying to run from that. Very different from what Harris did in picking Walz. Here was a little bit of what Trump White House veteran Stephen Miller said in response to my questioning on The Beat last night.
Project 2025 has absolutely nothing to do with the past, present, or future. President Trump and President Trump alone will make his own policies. I can assure you that nobody involved in working on Project 2025 in any substantive fashion is going to be involved in any future policy decision.
You've just said that. The former president said that, as I mentioned. There are issues where we see a kind of overlap.
President Trump is sui generis. He is President Trump. He has his own agenda that is his and his alone.
His own agenda and not a 2025 agenda. There's so much happening, it would be easy to miss some of these larger themes or think that this is the norm. Like I mentioned, it's not the norm. Kamala Harris taught the country something about her leadership, her comfort and interest in inclusion, just like those white dude Zoom calls and the camo hats and all these other things, but it all adds up to something substantive because it does not also include some sort of running from the core substance of the policies that she and the Biden-Harris administration say they are pursuing. Voters, hopefully armed with the facts, can make up their own mind about whether they like that or not. Like I said, I don't know politically in November whether it'll help or hurt that they are going more blue and more strong on certain domestic progressive agendas, but they are. And that's different than past Democrats, and it's different than Donald Trump running from the 2025 plans that we know he has. So it is perhaps a firecracker summer. Red and blue coexisting. Tim Walz was one of the most bipartisan members of the House when he served there. That yes, in style and substance, we might not only coexist, but thrive together.
We are back with Mara, Jim, David, and Anthony. So, Mara, Vice President Harris just making a little bit of news on the rope line there, where she's still greeting folks in the crowd who came out to see her speak. She told one of my colleagues that, and she had all but dared Trump to go ahead and keep his commitment and show up for this ABC debate on September 10th. She confirmed that she will be here. And a lot of what Trump's doing now is responding to her, a very public taunt to, quote, say it to my face, the insults that Anthony's talking about, calling her dumb, saying she just turned black. The hideous things he's been saying that offend not just her, but every woman and every person who's taking them in will now be potentially something that is discussed between the two of them face to face on a live televised debate on September 10th on ABC News. Mara?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to see, I believe, a very different debate than the one we saw, obviously, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. But I, like you, Nicole, find it interesting that the vice president has barely even, responded to Donald Trump. It's like he can barely get her attention. And, I want to go back for a moment to return to talk about the size of the crowds that we're seeing, because what I really believe is that while there is genuine enthusiasm for Vice President Harris and Governor Walz, I actually think what we're seeing is something even larger than that. I think we're seeing pro-democracy rallies. This is a pro-democracy movement that seems to have spread like wildfire. The energy was already there, and now there is finally a team to lead that movement. That's how it feels to me. The other thing that's been interesting is to watch that shifting dynamic, because, Donald Trump is the kind of man who needs people to be afraid. He wants Democrats and people who believe in democracy to be afraid of him. And he wants his supporters to be afraid of their neighbors and friends and relatives who vote differently or pray differently or look differently than they do. The problem that he has now is that all across the country, we are seeing that Americans are no longer afraid. They're no longer afraid of Donald Trump. They're not afraid of Trumpism. And I actually think it's the energy that is fueling that is remarkable. We have a situation where Democrats went from what felt kind of like a wake for democracy. I mean, the anxiety, the dread of the election was palpable, to now it just feels like a Black family reunion. And now, on top of that, you have a governor in Tim Walz, who I believe, as someone who has family from the Midwest, UAW family, both Black and white, my mother is a white woman, Tim Walz is essentially inviting Trump supporters into the party. Hey, it's not so scary. There's a place for you at the table. So I think Trump is melting down, and he's looking smaller and angrier, as is J.D. Vance, as the crowds just get bigger. So this is really doing some major psychological work on the former president. But I think it's also just, it's not just about the Democrats. This is a pro-democracy movement.
Mara Gay, I think you have just hit the nail on the head. This is exactly what has been unleashed by Vice President Kamala Harris. This is what the joy is about, right? It is about her, because without her, right, it doesn't have anywhere to go. But what people are, I think, feeling relieved about is that democracy has this really effective, really fearless really accomplished prosecutor, prosecuting the case not just against Donald Trump, but against Project 2025, against authoritarianism. And people have been afraid, not of Trump, because he is, sort of to Anthony's point, feeble and obvious now when he lies, but because the agenda was so hideous. And because of the success of the propaganda integration with the Republican Party and the abdication of any other leaders in the party standing up and saying anything, it felt, to your point, it did feel like a wake for democracy. Just talk about the opportunity that she has now in the next 89 days to ride this pro-democracy movement.
Yeah, she's doing a great job so far. We hope to see her answer some questions. I believe that's probably coming. But she looks very comfortable on the trail. She looks very comfortable in a union hall, which is not surprising. She's been a strong supporter of labor. She's got to really keep this coalition, which is a very broad one, together. She's got to start answering some tough questions. And, she's doing it. I don't think it's going to be it's going to be, I can't believe it's only 90 days, but I think we're all kind of still, our heads are spinning a little bit about what we've seen in the last month alone. But she, I believe, can probably pull it off. And I think this is a ticket that's only bringing more energy to the table. It's been remarkable to watch. I mean, I was somebody who was quite young when Barack Obama was running for president. And I remember the energy that then I lived in Michigan in a swing state. This does feel similar. It feels also like Vice President Harris understands that, this is a comfortable place for her to be in because she loves the country that we have. And I think a lot of this is about that, too. It's like this is a big, diverse, fascinating country with people from all different backgrounds from around the world. And we should be proud of that. She looks like she's excited, and boy, those crowds are remarkable.
Let me see the crowds one more time. David Jolly, the vanity of Donald Trump cannot survive this. And when you couple that with the labels, I mean, he's been branded, whether he knows it or not. Governor Walz branded his sort of line of attack in this frame of shrinking him down to size. And what you saw was a shriveled political figure. I mean, to the points everyone has made, there was no messaging on the podium, just a guy who walked out to the dining room where he lives. This is sort of the real Trump, maybe revealed for the first time in 9 years.
Yeah, Nicole, with Donald Trump, I truly think we are witnessing one of the, if not the worst presidential campaigns in modern political history. And it's not the fault of his team per se. Sure, they could do more. It's the fault of the candidate. He is a terrible candidate, and he's the wrong candidate for this moment. In 2016, despite the Electoral College popular vote split, you could argue he was the right candidate for the moment. You need a time to rise. He is running a terrible campaign, perhaps the worst presidential campaign we've seen in modern history. And, think about it this way. There's a bit of a strategy in a lot of campaigns, particularly down the stretch, which is you start the day wanting to win the day. Did you win the day? And if it's been 15 days since Vice President Harris was in the race, she's 15-0. And Donald Trump's 0-15. Look at today, what you just talked about, his kind of meandering screed at Mar-a-Lago that was all about him, or the vice president with the UAW celebrating the endorsement together as a coalition that want to move the country forward. It's night and day. And the one thing that perhaps Donald Trump needs, the challenge in front of him that a traditional candidate might realize, Donald Trump now needs this race to be about ideology, but he doesn't have one. And where he does have one, it's out of touch with the majority of Americans. Donald Trump almost needs this campaign on his side to be a Reagan-like campaign about a conservative vision, or a Romney-Ryan, almost wonky campaign where the true contrast works. Not just the angry old man at Mar-a-Lago calling Harris and Walz liberal, progressives, whatever he wants to term them, and insulting them. That doesn't work in this moment, because in this moment, Americans see in Vice President Harris and Governor Walz somebody that, regardless of ideology, what Mara was saying, we're all rowing in the same direction in defense of the country we love. And in Donald Trump, you just see him demeaning the country every day. If the Republicans had the ticket that could make this race about ideology, perhaps the contrast is there for a competitive race. But, Nicole, Republicans have the wrong ticket this year in Trump-Vance. They simply have the wrong ticket. And they're losing every single day. They're going to lose this race as well.
NBC News correspondent Monica Alba following the Harris campaign. NBC's Dasha Burns is covering the Trump campaign. Also with us, Zerlina Maxwell, host of Mornings with Zerlina on Sirius XM, and Jennifer Horn, former RNC executive committee member and former New Hampshire Republican Party chair. Okay, Dasha, Trump has been physically absent from the campaign trail for, as we mentioned, over a week as his campaign's going on the attack, specifically against the newest entry, Tim Walz. What's going on?
Well, so his running mate, J.D. Vance, has been out on the campaign trail. He was asked about the former president's absence from the trail, and he claimed that they were doing a sort of divide and conquer strategy. So today we're not going to see Senator Vance out on the trail. But as you mentioned at the top there, we will see former President Trump at a press conference this afternoon. And it's interesting to watch this week as we've had that split screen of Harris and Walz out there and Vance out there, just the kind of difference in tone, where Harris and Walz are sort of going the cheerful, happy warrior route. Vance going another direction. He was asked about that. Take a listen to what he said.
You've been criticized as being a little too serious, maybe angry sometimes. What makes you smile? What makes you happy?
Well, I smile at a lot of things, including bogus questions from the media, man. Sometimes you got to take the good with the bad. And right now, I am angry about what Kamala Harris has done to this country.
And Anna, you've sort of watched this play out in real time as both Vance and Trump and the campaign overall are trying different strategies, different attacks on Harris and Walz to see what sticks, because this dynamic has changed, and it's changed in favor of the Democrats for now and posing new challenges for the Trump campaign.
We've been following along with J.D. Vance solo out there, this sort of shadow strategy going where Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are traveling. And so what do we know about why Trump decided he needed to hold this event today at Mar-a-Lago? Is there a sense that he is frustrated with his own campaign?
It's a great question. I mean, those of us who have been watching him, who are covering him, we were a little bit perplexed about his lack of events this week, to be honest. And the Washington Post is now reporting that he has grown increasingly frustrated seeing these poll numbers, seeing sort of the Harris surge, and he's been complaining, asking friends about how his campaign is performing, according to the Washington Post reporting. So this might be his attempt to get back into the headlines, to grab the spotlight again, and we'll see if he makes any news this afternoon.
I remember as president, oftentimes we were told that he thinks he's his own best messenger. Perhaps this is his opportunity to try to steal back some of the spotlight and change some of the headlines. Monica, the Harris campaign has been defending attacks against Walz, specifically his military record, but they're really trying to keep the focus on the enthusiasm around the ticket, this joyful warrior messaging. How's that working?
Yeah, they're trying to really carry some of that energy that we saw in Philadelphia at the beginning of the week when they were first on stage together into these other key battleground states. And they're hoping that some of that enthusiasm will continue. But they're touting the fact that there are some large crowds turning out, especially compared to the kind of folks we would see at Joe Biden events earlier in the cycle. This is really turning the page and a completely different environment for Democrats. So they're trying to seize on that a little bit. You saw even the vice president pulling her plane up to that airport hangar last night and having this moment visually and optically that they're trying to lean into that complements exactly that joyful warrior mentality that is not just now being talked about by the campaign, but it's really being leaned into by the candidates and the nominees themselves. Here's a little bit about the vice president and Governor Walz had to say on that yesterday.
And understand, in this fight, as Tim Walz likes to point out, we are joyful warriors. Joyful warriors.
We're asking a fair shot. We're asking for health care and child care. We're asking for an education. We're asking for safety in our streets. That's what we're asking for.
So that's the contrast that they're going to be highlighting as they do continue in Michigan today. Then they're going to be heading out west to Arizona and Nevada for a multi-day swing where they're going to be targeting Latino voters in particular. But remember, it was Governor Walz who first populated this idea that the Republicans, that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance were weird. They're trying to basically say we're the happy, joyful people. They're the weird and extreme ones. So that is sort of the dichotomy they're trying to seize on to see if that appeals to voters.
The contrast in imaging is definitely striking when you look at these pictures of these huge rallies and lots of smiles and upbeat attitudes. And then you have J.D. Vance by himself out there hitting the campaign trail with just talking to reporters as opposed to holding big rally events. Thank you, Monica Alba, Dasha Burns, for bringing us the latest from the trail. Jennifer, let's talk a little bit about the increase in attacks on Walz. Is the strategy to hit him with all they've got while voters are still getting to know him, and how effective could it be?
Well, that's clearly the strategy, but I think in this particular case, it's not going to be very effective, and for a few reasons. I think that some of the attacks are shallow and easily proven to be either misleading or false, entirely. But more importantly than that is the energy that Walz has brought to this campaign is unbelievable. And it's something that so far J.D. Vance and Donald Trump have not been able to match. I think that is going to grow as they head into the convention. And that's something that's going to be very difficult at this point in the campaign to try to stop with these, really ugly and in most cases dishonest attacks.
Zerlina, Republicans are hitting Walz in part for his response to protests in Minnesota following George Floyd's death. But there's some new audio that surfaced of praise from Trump to Governor Walz back in June of 2020. So right after those protests really broke out, the riots had started. Take a listen to this.
I know Governor Walz is on the phone and we spoke. And I fully agree with the way he handled it the last couple of days. 3 days later, I spoke to the governor. The governor is, I think, on the call, and he's an excellent guy. And all of a sudden, and I said, you got to use the National Guard in big numbers. They did it first.
Does that negate the Trump campaign's entire line of attack?
Yes. Because you have a tape of Donald Trump saying literally the opposite thing. And to Jennifer's point, I think when your attacks can be easily disproven, they're very weak. And I think that what we're seeing right now is a contrast, right? A split screen of a campaign where Donald Trump needs to have a press conference at his own resort in order to capture media attention, and the Democrats really organically feeling excited and enthusiastic about voting and participating in this election. And the most important thing, it's not just that the rallies are big and that everybody is joyful and happy, but the important thing for the campaign is to translate that enthusiasm into early voting. Take your base, take all the names of all those thousands of people that are showing up at your rallies and make sure that they're early voting so that the home stretch of the campaign, you're focusing on those more sporadic, harder to get voters that aren't in your base. And I think that these rallies are amazing to see its history in real time, but it's important to translate that into winning on the ground.
Jennifer, I want to show something that happened yesterday during the rally for the Harris-Walz campaign. Watch this.
Donald Trump was just found guilty of fraud. 34 counts, to be exact. Hold on. You know what? Here, hold on. Here's the thing. The courts are going to handle that. We're going to beat them in November.
So she tamped down the lock him up chants. What do you read from that moment?
I think that they are just pitch perfect on their messaging and their presentation. The American people are exhausted by the ugliness, the dishonesty, the attacks, the misogyny, the racism that has been coming out of Donald Trump's mouth and his campaign and his administration for 8 years now. I think that what the message on that and what we see Tim Walz and Kamala Harris doing to try to keep their activists focused on what matters, on the issues that count, and trying to keep the demeanor of the campaign as positive and as upbeat as possible is exactly what the American people are looking for.
There was another moment, Zerlina, where VP Harris was interrupted last night in Michigan by about a half dozen pro-Palestinian protesters. Take a listen to how she responded to that.
Because we believe in democracy. Everyone's voice matters, but I am speaking now.
So this was an issue we know that followed President Biden when he was still the Democratic nominee. What's your reaction, Zerlina, to how she handled those protesters?
I like the way that she handled these protesters. It's no surprise that you have protesters in Michigan talking about this very, very important issue. And I think that we all believe in democracy. And so people are going to raise their voices and talk about the issues they care most about. But I do think that it is correct in a moment like that, when you're in the middle of a speech, to sort of quiet that down so that you can focus on the content of the speech, and also to point out the contrast, as she did later on in the rally, between what Donald Trump will do on the issue that those activists care so much about and what she will do on that issue. And she's been a little bit different than the president on the issue of Gaza, calling for a ceasefire on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, really, really symbolic there in Selma. And so I think that if the activists want her to hear their message, they should listen to what she says about this issue. She obviously had strong remarks after meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, and I think that there should be a two-way dialogue between the campaign and the activists who care most about this issue.